to deliver the graduation address.
My warmest congratulations to all of you for your magnificent achievement. I'm going to ask you to do something difficult now, and that is to relax in your chair, take a deep breath, and consider this significant moment. And then transport yourself about 30 years into the future and take my shoes at the lectern and consider what you might say to new doctors. The changes in your lifetime will be mind-boggling. There will be specialisation of medicine that we haven't yet imagined. There will be some specialties now that we regard with high status that will be replaced by new technologies. It will be hard to imagine. But there's one thing in medicine in your lifetime that will not change. And that one thing is the importance of humanity, which is the topic of my address today. As many doctors find, there were a number of transformational personal experiences throughout my medical career, and I've written many stories about many experiences that changed my life. But the one I would like to share with you today is about working as a general practitioner at a remote Aboriginal community controlled health service in far northern Queensland in the 90s, because that's what changed my life. So first a story for you. At the Aboriginal Health Service, I was given what seemed to be the simple task of helping to set up a well kids clinic in an isolated settlement on the outskirts of a remote far northern Queensland town. Many babies and children were seriously underweight and underdeveloped. Families could not afford formula, and mothers commonly fed their babies adult powdered milk or cordial rather than breastfeeding. Most children had never been immunised, and many were covered with scabies and impetigo, including a 3-week-old baby. A 5-month-old baby was delirious with meningitis. His young mother bravely took him to hospital. Her other 2 children had died there of sudden infant death and during childbirth. I cared for a 2-year-old child with chronic heart disease due to rheumatic fever, and she died 1 week later in hospital. Tragic for so many reasons, not the least being that so many young lives were destroyed by a lack of access to basic primary care. In the first few weeks, mothers replied to my questions with one-word answers and downcast eyes, sometimes walking away to spit filthy sputum through broken fly screens, chase dogs out of the clinic, or retrieve my medical equipment from their toddlers. Amidst the chaos and the dancing of eyes, mothers, aunties and grandmothers, I found it difficult to work out which child belonged to which parent. They all seemed to belong to everyone. As the weeks went by, the women seemed to engage me with their eyes and slowly developed trust. The more I saw of how people lived in such difficult circumstances, the more I admired their strength. They gave me so much more than I gave them. As I dropped my own children to primary school each morning, we often drove past homeless Aboriginal people living in the parks. It was difficult to answer my young sons when they asked why these people live in public toilet blocks, and I found my son crying one rainy night because the park people would be getting wet. I feel a great urgency to talk about what I've seen, but very few non-Aboriginal people seem to want to listen. While many people with little knowledge of Aboriginal health don't particularly care about my experiences, others ask the same questions. Why did you leave your comfortable private practice to work in a low-status job? Why have millions of dollars been poured into Aboriginal health when it's hopeless? And how did you stand the smell? I can only answer that stereotyping and generalisations are extremely damaging and a barrier to Aboriginal people accessing health services. For example, racist attitudes deterred many Aboriginal people from attending the hospital, which meant they presented late with serious illness. I asked all my Aboriginal patients where they found the strength to carry on through such difficult circumstances, and their answer was always the same: their hope for their children's future. The only smell I've experienced is the stench of racism. Many of you will have worked in Aboriginal communities as medical students and understand what I've just said. I hope you will all consider, at least for a short period, working in an Indigenous community as a doctor, because not only will you contribute, but you will find, like me, that you grow personally and professionally. My experience had a profound impact on my family and I, and I would just like to read one more short excerpt from my personal diary to illustrate how this happened. So when I was called to the school by my son's fourth grade teacher after we returned to Victoria from far North Queensland, my young son had a wild imagination. He'd told the class that his dad had fallen into a river full of crocodiles and his mum visited toilets in parks to take sick Aboriginal people to hospital. I had to admit that these things were true, but the rumour that we spent our weekends shooting wild pigs was definitely not. That was our neighbour. A few weeks later, I arrived at the school late after being delayed at work in a clinic for homeless youth, this time attending to a pregnant 14-year-old and a suicidal 13-year-old boy. I sat alone in the schoolyard contemplating why I work and already feeling guilty that we'd forgotten to bring my children's sports uniforms that day, and now feeling worse that my children had been sent to after-school care as their mother had failed to turn up on time. My heart sank when my son's fourth grade teacher called me into the class to speak to me again. That day, the class had been asked to nominate people who have changed the world, and there amongst the Queen, Gandhi, Mother Teresa and the Prime Minister, I recognised my son's handwriting. Leanne Rowe was also on the whiteboard. And until this time, I had not been aware of the impact on my children of my work as a doctor. And when I collected my sons from after-school care, I admitted to them that I was worried that my work was stressing our family. They said, "You've taught us never to give up. Don't give up." So there were two lasting positives that came out of this experience. Firstly, my sons never forgot to pack their sports uniforms again. Secondly, from that time, I realised that having a purpose enabled me to transcend the inevitable challenges at work and at home. Instead of shielding my children from my work, I frequently discussed issues with them, like the importance of equity of health and education, which is now why I believe they are making their own impact on the world as impossibly well-adjusted adults. And around this time, I also discovered the words of playwright George Bernard Shaw, who said, "This is the true joy in life, being used for a purpose recognised by yourself as a mighty one, being a force of nature instead of complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. And you will find that the true joy in medicine is being used for a purpose recognised by yourself as a mighty one." Every day as doctors, we're exposed to rare insights into life, and this is a great privilege. but a medical career has many challenges which you may already be concerned about. And before you start your life as a doctor, please be proactive in preparing yourself personally. And as a start, you may like to look at my blog called medicineisbeautiful.com, which is about thriving in medicine and sharing solutions to common personal challenges and self-care. And I would love to get your feedback on my articles and ebooks. In closing, as I feel overwhelmed to receive the honour of a Doctor of Laws honoris causa, I wish to acknowledge my Monash family, the Chancellor, Deputy Chancellors, Vice-Chancellor, Dean of your faculty, former Vice-Chancellor Richard Larkins, past and current council members and past and current teachers. Thank you, most of all, for your humanity. Your presence at this ceremony means more to me than you could ever know. When I reflect on my work, it's a grain of sand compared with the joy that I've experienced through having my own children and watch them grow into great men. One of my most precious moments was when my son, on finishing university, looked me in the eyes and said, "Thank you, I love you." I hope you will not miss that precious moment with your loved ones today. And neither will I. To my wonderful husband, Dr. Peter Jasek, thank you for sharing the joy of raising two beautiful men, Chris and Louis, the adventure of rural general practice, and for outswimming that crocodile. I love you. Life, like medicine, has been very beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne, for that most wonderful address in this conferring ceremony. Indeed, I guess as we celebrate the conclusion of so many wonderful achievements at this university, with those graduates in front of me, at the end of the day, it's all very important to have these technical achievements, but as we have been reminded so profoundly in these last few minutes, they also need to be supplemented by very strong personal relationships in the background, particularly when people like you are going to be working very, very hard. So thank you again, Leanne. Graduates, as you leave the ceremony, remember that you are not leaving the university. Thank you. I know that university study